Hi, my name's Elle, and I'm here to share with you one of my favorite stories. When I was a kid, my dad used to read me The Wizard of Oz, and it was absolutely my favorite thing to do before I went to sleep at night. So, since everyone's home and has a lot of time on their hands, I figured that I would share the story with you. I found this awesome hardcover book online, and it has a lot of really pretty illustrations in it. So I'm happy to read this to you guys. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but this one has some different parts that the movie doesn't have. So I'm very excited to read. It will probably take about an hour, and you guys can start and stop at your leisure. I recorded this all in one run, so enjoy The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies, with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small. There were 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, which made one single room. This room contained a rusty-looking cooking stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and 2 beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had the big bed in the corner, and Dorothy a little bed in the other corner. There was no attic at all, and no cellar, except a small, dark hole dug into the ground called a cyclone cellar. This is where the family could go in case one of those great whirlwinds arose mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trap door in the middle of the floor. A cyclone is also another word for a tornado. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. Not a tree nor a house broke the broad sweep of flat country. The sun had baked the plow land into a sad gray mass. Once the house had been painted and pretty, but now it was dull and gray, just like everything else. When Aunt Em came there to live, she was a young, pretty wife, full of life and color herself. But the sun and wind had changed her too. They had taken away the sparkle from her eyes and cheeks and left them gray. She never smiled. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been startled by the child's laughter. Whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears, she looked at the little girl with wonder, wondering why she could find anything to laugh at. Uncle Henry never laughed either, for he worked long and hard from morning till night. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh. Toto was a tiny little black dog with long, silky hair and twinkling black eyes. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him. She loved him very dearly. Today, however, they were not playing, for Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky as he tapped his foot. Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky too, wondering what was happening. From the far north they heard a low wail of the wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves before the coming storm. There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and as they turned their eyes that way, they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly, Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called. "I'll go look after the stock." Then he ran out towards the cows and horses. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her of the danger ahead. "Quick, Dorothy!" she screamed. "Run for the cellar!" Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed. Aunt Em threw open the trap door and climbed down the ladder into the dark cellar. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt. All at once there came a great shriek from the wind. Whoo! And the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly on the floor. Then a strange thing happened. The house whirled around, not 1, not 2, but 3 times, and rose slowly up into the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a hot air balloon. The great pressure of the wind on every side of the house raised it up higher and higher till it was at the very top of the cyclone. And there it remained, and there it was carried for miles and miles, as easily as the wind would carry a feather. It was dark, and the wind howled horribly all around her. Dorothy felt like she was riding quite easily, though. After the first few whirls around, she felt as if she were being rocked rather gently. Hour after hour passed, and Dorothy got over her fright, but she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked loudly and whipped the windows and shutters. At first she wondered if she'd be dashed to pieces when the house fell, but as time passed and nothing terrible happened, she seemed to stop worrying. At last she crawled over the dirty floor and into her bed to lay down. Toto curled up and laid down beside her. In spite of the swaying and shrieking of the wind, Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Dorothy was awakened with a shock. What had happened? Toto put his little wet nose into her face. She sprang from her bed and with Toto at her heels ran and opened the door. Dorothy gave a cry of amazement as she looked out about her, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at the wonderful sights that she saw. The cyclone had set the house down very gently for a cyclone, in the midst of a country of such marvelous beauty. Banks of gorgeous flowers were on every hand, and the birds with brilliant, beautiful feathers sang in the trees and the bushes. While she stood gazing at the strange sights, she saw coming toward her a group of very queer-looking people. They were not as big as the grown folk that she knew, nor were they very, very, very small like babies. In fact, they seemed just her size, although they looked really old. The 3 men and 1 woman were all very oddly dressed. They wore round hats that rose to a point, with little bells around the brims that tinkled when they walked. The men's hats were blue, and the women's hat was white. She also wore a pretty white gown sprinkled with little stars that glistened in the sunlight. The men were about as old as Uncle Henry, but the little woman was much, much older. Her hair was nearly white, and she walked rather stiffly. They drew near the house, and the little old woman walked up to Dorothy and gave a low, deep bow. "You are welcome, most noble sorceress, to the land of the Munchkins. We are so grateful to you for having killed the Wicked Witch of the East and setting our people free from her horrible bondage." What could she possibly mean by calling Dorothy a sorceress? She had never killed anything. You were very kind, but there must be some mistake. I've not killed anything," said Dorothy. "Your house did, anyway," said the old woman. "Ha! And that's much of the same thing. See?" Dorothy looked and then gave a cry of fright as under the corner of the house there were 2 feet sticking out, clad in sparkly silver shoes. "That's all that's left of the Wicked Witch of the East. She enslaved all the Munchkins for many years. Now they are free and grateful for you to the faithful." "Who are the Munchkins?" Dorothy asked the old woman. "They are the people that live in this land of the East," said the old woman. "Are you a Munchkin?" asked Dorothy. "No, I am the Witch of the North, but I am a good witch. The bad witch is dead." She laughed. And with that laugh, the feet inside the shoes disappeared. You could see. It's the feet right there, and the witch, the little Munchkin peoples. All that was left were the sparkling silver shoes. "She was so old that she dried up quickly in the sun. Those silver shoes are yours." She picked up and dusted them off and handed them to Dorothy. "There is some charm connected with them, but what it is we never know," said the old woman. "I must go home to my aunt and uncle in Kansas," said Dorothy. "I'm sure they're worried about me. Can you show me the way?" The good witch said, "The land of Oz is surrounded on all sides by a great desert. You must go to the City of Emeralds. It's ruled by Oz, the great wizard, who was more powerful than all of the witches together. He may help you." Dorothy asked anxiously, "How do I get there?" "The road to the City of Emeralds is paved with a yellow brick," said the witch, "so you cannot miss it. You must walk through a country sometimes pleasant and sometimes dark and terrible. However, my magic arts can help keep you from harm. No one will dare injure a person who has been kissed by the Witch of the North." And she came close to Dorothy and kissed her gently on the forehead. Her lips left a round, shining mark. Then she whirled around, hopped on her feet, clicked her left heel 3 times, and poof, disappeared, much to Toto's surprise. But Dorothy, knowing her to be a witch, she wasn't surprised. She knows that's the kind of thing that witches do. When Dorothy was left alone, she set about making the journey to the City of Emeralds. She had only one other dress that lay hanging on a peg beside her bed. She took it off the peg and dressed herself in a clean blue and white checkered gingham. She tied her pink sunbonnet on her head and took a little basket and filled it with bread from the cupboard, laying a white cloth over the top. Then she looked down at her feet and noticed how worn and ugly her gray shoes were. "They will surely never do for a long journey," she said to Toto. And then Toto looked up into her face and wagged his tail to show her exactly he knew what she meant. And at that moment Dorothy saw the silver shoes that had belonged to the Witch of the East. She said to Toto, "They would be just the thing." She took off her old gray leather shoes and put on the new sparkly silver shoes. They fit her as well as if they had been made for her. Finally, she picked up her basket. "Come along, Toto," she said. "We will go to the Emerald City and ask the Great Oz how to get back to Kansas again." She closed the door and locked it. She didn't want anyone to go inside, and put the key carefully in the pocket of her dress. And so, with Toto trotting along soberly behind her, she started on her journey. There were several roads nearby, but it did not take her long to find the one paved with the yellow brick. Follow the yellow brick road. In a short time, she was walking briskly towards the Emerald City, her silver shoes tinkling and shining merrily on the hard yellow roadbed. The sun shined so bright and the birds sang so sweet, and Dorothy did not feel nearly as bad as you might think a little girl would in a strange, strange land. She was surprised as she walked along to see how pretty the country was about her. There was no gray. There were neat fences at the side of the road, painted a dainty blue color, and beyond them were fields of grain and vegetables in large abundance. Once in a while she would pass a house, and the people would come out and take a long bow as she went by, for everyone knew she had been the means of slaying the witch. The houses of the Munchkins were odd-looking dwellings, kind of like their hats and clothes, for each was round with a big dome on the roof. All were painted blue, for in this East Country, blue was the favorite color. Towards the evening, when Dorothy was tired with her long walk, she came to a house rather larger than the rest. On the green lawn before it, many men and women were dancing. 5 little fiddlers played as loud as possible, and the people were laughing and singing, while a big table nearby was loaded with delicious fruits, nuts, pies, and cakes, and many other good things to eat. The people greeted Dorothy kindly and invited her for supper, to pass the night with them and to celebrate their freedom from the bondage of the wicked witch. Dorothy was waited on by a munchkin named Bach. She watched the people dance. Bach saw her silver shoes and said, "You must be a great sorceress." "Why?" asked Dorothy. "Because you wear the silver shoes that have killed the wicked witch. Besides, you have white on your dress, and only witches and sorceresses wear white." "My dress is blue and white checkered," said Dorothy. "It's kind of you to wear that," said Bach. "Blue is the munchkin color, and white is the witch color, so we know you must be a friendly munchkin witch." Dorothy didn't know what to say, for everyone seemed to think of her as a witch, and she knew very well she was just an ordinary little girl. When she had tired, Bach led her to the house, where he gave her a room with a nice, pretty, and comfortable bed in it. Dorothy lay down in the bed and slept soundly until morning, with Toto curled up beside her. After breakfast, she asked Bach how far it was towards the Emerald City. "I do not know," answered Bach gravely, "for I have never been there. But it's a long way to the Emerald City, and will take you many, many days. The country here is pleasant, but you must pass through rough, tough darkness and dangerous places before you reach the end of your journey." This worried Dorothy a little bit, but she knew that only the great Oz could help her get to Kansas again, so she bravely resolved there would be no turning back. She bid goodbye to her new friends and again started along the road of yellow. "Follow the yellow brick road." When she had gone several miles, she thought she might need to stop and rest, for her feet were growing tired, and so she climbed on top of a fence beside the road and sat down. There was a great cornfield beyond the fence, and not so far away she saw a scarecrow placed high upon a bull to keep the birds away from the ripe corn. Dorothy leaned her chin up upon her hand and gazed thoughtfully at the scarecrow. Its head was a small stack stuffed with straw, with eyes, nose, and a mouth painted on it to represent a face. Though Dorothy was surprised to see the eyes slowly wink at her, she thought she must have been mistaken, for Kansas is a place where scarecrows do not wink at you. She shook her head and rubbed her eyes, but then it nodded its head at her in a friendly kind of way. "Good day," said the scarecrow in a rather husky voice. Did you just speak to me?" she said to the air. "Certainly," answered the scarecrow. "How do you do?" "I'm pretty well, thank you," replied Dorothy. "How do you do?" "I'm not feeling well," said the scarecrow with a smile, "for it is very tedious being perched up here to scare away the crows." "Can't you get down?" asked Dorothy. "No, for this pole is stuck up my back. If you will please help take away the pole, I shall be greatly obliged to you." Dorothy lifted the figure off the pole. Being stuffed with straw, he was quite light. It was easy to do. "Thank you," he said. "Who are you, and where are you going?" "My name is Dorothy, and I am going to the Emerald City to ask the Great Oz to send me back to Kansas." "Where is the Emerald City?" he inquired. "And who is this Oz?" "Why, don't you know?" she said, surprised, for he is the first person that did not know of Oz. "No, indeed. I don't know anything, you see. I am stuffed, so I have no brains." "Oh, it is sad," he said. "Do you think if I go to the Emerald City with you, then the Great Oz will give me some brains?" "I cannot tell," she said, "but you can join me if you want. If Oz won't give you any brains, you'll be no worse off than you are now." "That is true," said the scarecrow. "You see, I don't mind being a body stuffed, because I cannot get hurt, but I do not want people to call me a fool. And if my head stays stuffed with straw instead of with brains, as yours is, how will I ever know anything? How will I know if I'm not a fool?" Dorothy smiled, and they walked back to the yellow brick road. "Follow the yellow brick road," and started along the path for the Emerald City. Toto sniffed and growled at the scarecrow. He was not sure how to take this new creature. "Don't mind Toto," said Dorothy. "He never bites." "Oh, I'm not afraid of him. All I'm afraid of is a lighted match." "Tell me about where you come from," he said, as they walked, so she told him all about Kansas and how gray everything was there. The Scarecrow could not understand why she wished to leave this beautiful country and go back to a grumpy, gray, boring place called Kansas. That's because you have no brains, said the girl. No matter how dreary and gray our homes are, the people would rather live there than anywhere else because that's where their family is. There's no place like home. Toward evening they came to a great forest where the trees grew so big and close together that their branches met over the yellow brick road and shut out all the remaining daylight. They stumbled along in the thick darkness until the Scarecrow saw a little cottage. He led her to it, and Dorothy went inside soon to find a bed and soon fell sound asleep with Toto beside her. The Scarecrow, who was never tired because he didn't have brains to tell him when to go to sleep, stood up in a corner and waited patiently until morning, keeping watch over Dorothy. When Dorothy awoke, the sun was shining, and Toto was already out chasing the birds and squirrels. She sat up and looked around. There was the Scarecrow, staring at her, patiently waiting. They left the cottage and walked until they found a little spring, where Dorothy drank and took a bath to freshen up. Through the trees was a clearing by the roadside. There they sat down, and Dorothy opened her basket and broke off a piece of bread. She offered some to the Scarecrow, but he refused. I am never hungry, and it isn't a lucky thing I'm not, for my mouth is only painted. Imagine if I tried to stick something into my mouth, and if I should cut a hole in it, so I could eat, the straw I am stuffed with would come out, and that would spoil the shape of my head. Dorothy laughed and shook her head, and at once she did see that this was true. Why don't you tell me a story while we're resting, she said. The Scarecrow looked at her and answered, My life has been so short that I really know nothing whatever. I was only made the day before yesterday. When the farmer made my head, one of the first things he did was paint on my ears so that I could hear what was going on. Then he painted my right eye, and as soon as it would finish, I found myself looking at him and everything around me with a great deal of curiosity, for this was my first glimpse of the world. But I didn't have a brain, so I didn't know what anything was called. The farmer then carried me to the cornfield, set me up on a stick, and then you found me. Dorothy smiled at the Scarecrow. She packed up her basket to go, but then she was startled by a deep groan. What was that? She asked the Scarecrow. I can imagine, replied the Scarecrow, but we can go and see. They went back into the forest a few steps and peered around the corner, and Dorothy saw, standing beside one of the big, huge trees, with an axe in his hand, a man made entirely of metal and tin. He stood there, perfectly motionless, as if he could not stir at all, frozen. She wondered if that is where the sound had come from. Toto barked sharply and made a snap at the tin legs. Ow! But then he realized they hurt his teeth. Did you groan? Dorothy asked the metal man.
Yes, said the tin man. I did. I've been groaning for more than a year, and no one has ever heard me before or come to help me.
What can I do for you? She asked.
Please, get the oil can from the shelf in my cottage and oil my joints, he said.
Dorothy did at once what he asked. On her return, the Tin Woodsman said, Oil my neck first, please. So she oiled it, and it was rusted quite badly. The Scarecrow took hold of his tin head and twisted it around, gently from side to side until it worked freely and the man could turn it himself. Now oil the joints in my arms, he said, and Dorothy did. Finally, the Tin Woodsman lowered his axe. This is a great comfort, he said. I have been holding that axe in the air since I rusted a year ago. Now, if you will please, oil the joints of my legs. I'll be all right once more.
I might have stood there always if you hadn't come along, he said, thanking them. How did you happen to be here?
We're going to the Emerald City to see the great Oz, she said.
Why do you wish to see Oz?
He asked. I want him to send me back to Kansas, and the Scarecrow wants him to put brains in his head, Dorothy replied. The Tin Woodsman appeared to think very deeply for a moment, and then he said,
Do you suppose Oz could give me a heart?
Well, I guess so, said Dorothy. It would be as easy as giving the Scarecrow some brains.
Well then, if you will allow me to join your party, I will also ask Oz to help me.
Come along, said the Scarecrow heartily, and Dorothy agreed. So the Tin Woodsman, Dorothy, Toto, and the Scarecrow put his oil can in her basket and set out through the forest. The Tin Woodsman said,
During the year I stood there, I had time to think that the greatest loss I had ever known was the loss of my heart. Once I was in love, but the girl I lived with an old woman who did not want me to marry her nor love her, so she had the Wicked Witch of the East cast a spell on me. So now I am made of all tin, and I am very lonely, and no one can love a man who has not a heart.
Oh, the same, said the Scarecrow. I shall ask for brains instead of a heart, for a fool would not know what to do with a heart if he had one.
Once I had brains and a heart also, so having tried them both, I should much rather like to have a heart, said the Woodsman, for brains do not make one happy.
Dorothy smiled. Dorothy and her companions walked through the thick woods where the yellow brick road was covered by dried branches and dead leaves. Now and then there came a deep growl from some wild animal hidden deep among the trees. The sounds made her think, what would be hiding in these dark woods? Toto walked close to her and did not even bark when he heard the growls. Suddenly, there came a terrible roar, and a great lion bounded onto the road in front of them. With one blow of his paw, he sent the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodsman spitting onto the floor. Toto, now that he had an enemy to face, ran barking toward the lion, and the great beast had opened his mouth to bite the dog when Dorothy, fearing Toto would be killed and heedless of any danger, rushed forward and slapped the lion right on the nose. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a big beast like you trying to pick on a little dog. I didn't bite him, said the lion, rubbing his nose, with a small tear coming from his eye. It is my great sorrow. Danger makes my heart pound. Perhaps if I had no heart, I should not be such a coward, he said, crying. Have you brains? Asked the Scarecrow. I suppose so, but I've never looked to see, said the lion. I'm going to the great Oz to ask him to give me some, said the Scarecrow, for my head is stuffed with straw.
And I'm going to ask him for a heart,
said the Woodsman. And I'm going to ask him to send me and Toto back to Kansas, said Dorothy. Do you think Oz could give me courage? Said the lion. Just as easily as he could give me brains, said the Scarecrow.
Or give me a heart,
said the Woodsman. Or send me back to Kansas, said Dorothy. Then, if you don't mind, I'll join you, said the Cowardly Lion. You'll be all very welcome, Dorothy said, so they all set off. Soon they saw a great ditch dividing the road. They crept up to the edge to look over. It was very deep, with many big jagged rocks at the bottom, and both sides were too steep to climb down. What shall we do? Asked Dorothy. I think I could jump over it, said the lion. Good, said the Scarecrow. You can carry us on your back, one at a time. The Scarecrow went first. Dorothy went next, with Toto in her arms. She climbed onto the lion's back, holding tightly onto his mane. The next moment, she felt as if she were flying through the air, and then before she had time to think about it, she was safe on the other side. Then the lion went back and got the woodsman. They walked along in the sunshine and met great clusters of scarlet poppies, which soon covered the yellow brick road. Now, the odor of many poppies together is so powerful that any who breathe it fall into a deep sleep, and if not taken away quickly, they will sleep forever. Soon, Dorothy began feeling tired. She feels she must sit down and rest. She wanted to sleep badly, but they would not let her, and they kept going until Dorothy's eyes closed and she fell among the poppies, fast asleep. Toto curled right beside her. The Scarecrow and the Woodsman, not being made of flesh, were not troubled by the flower's scent. The Scarecrow told the Lion, "Run, run, and get out of this deadly flower bed quickly. We'll bring Dorothy with us, but if she should fall asleep, we are too big to be carried." So the Lion bounded forward as fast as he could. The Scarecrow and the Woodsman picked up Toto and Dorothy and carried them through the great carpet of deadly flowers. They came at last upon their friend, the Lion, lying fast asleep among the poppies. The flowers had been too strong for the huge beast, and he had given up at last, and fallen asleep only a short distance from the very end of the poppy bed, where the grass spread into green fields before them.
"We can do nothing for him," said the Woodsman sadly, "for he is much too heavy to lift. We must leave him here to sleep forever, and perhaps he will dream that he has found his courage."
"I am sorry," said the Scarecrow. "The Lion was a good comrade for one so cowardly. But let's go on." They carried the sleeping girl to a pretty spot beside the river, far enough from the poppy field to prevent her breathing any more of the poison from the flowers. Here they laid her gently on the soft grass and waited for the fresh breeze to awaken her. As they stood beside the girl, the Woodsman heard a low growl and saw a wildcat running after a little field mouse. The Woodsman raised his axe and cut the cat's head off. In shock, Dorothy sat with her mouth open. Where'd it go? "Oh, thank you very much for saving my life," a little voice squeaked. "I am the queen of all the field mice." And then many field mice ran up, exclaiming that they were glad to find her alive. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This funny Tin Man," she said, "saved my life, so hereafter you'll obey his every wish. Is there anything you'd like for us to do you now?" said the mouse.
"Oh, yeah."
"Oh, yes," said the Scarecrow. "Please save our friend the Lion who is asleep in the poppy bed." "A lion?" cried the little queen. Why, he would eat us all up." "Oh, no. This lion is a coward. He says so himself," said the Scarecrow. "Please send for all your subjects to come at once and let them help me wake up the big beast. Please tell each one to bring a piece of string." And the Scarecrow instructed the Woodsman to chop up some trees to make a cart that they could carry the Lion in. Suddenly, mice came from all directions, and Dorothy was astonished to wake and find herself surrounded by thousands upon thousands of little mice looking at her timidly with sparkly black eyes. But the Scarecrow explained everything, and turning to the dignified little Queen Mouse, he said, "Permit me to introduce you to Her Majesty the Queen." Dorothy nodded gravely, and the Queen made a tiny mouse curtsy, after which she became quite friendly with the little girl. Then the Scarecrow and the Woodsman harnessed the mice to the cart, using all the pieces of string that they brought. When all the mice had been harnessed, they were able to pull it quite easily to the place where the Lion lay fast asleep. After much hard work, the two managed to get the lion onto the cart. At first, the little field mouse, many though they were, could hardly stir the heavy loaded cart. But with the help of the woodsman and the scarecrow pushing and the mice pulling, soon they rolled the lion out of the poppies to a place where he could breathe the fresh air once more. The Queen Mouse said,
"If you ever need us again, call out to us in the field, and we shall hear you and come to your aid. Goodbye."
"Thank you so much, and goodbye," Dorothy said, and away the Queen ran, while Dorothy held Toto tightly lest he should not run after and frighten her once again. Then they sat down beside the cowardly lion until he would awaken. Intermission.